and welcome to an episode that deals with portrait photography. The subject expert is Kumar Barun and I am Sakshi Madwal. Let us look at what we are going to discuss today. Understanding the meaning of people photography. Recognize the need and usage of people photography. Comprehending types of people photography. Appreciate the technique and equipment used for people photography. Understanding how to capture the correct portraits. Photographing people is the most common and in many ways the most challenging task for photographers. We all know a good picture when we see one. But what is it that makes the good one stand out? The problem is that we are used to seeing people moving around, or we remember their faces or doing something or talking to us. We very rarely see people completely motionless, except perhaps when they are fast asleep, so a single frozen moment in time can seem totally unrepresentative. That is why you can often find someone exclaiming after seeing a picture of theirs that it does not even look like him or her. Often, a photographer captures a subject in a pose that was rare and not noticed before. Still images have that quality about it. So what makes a good portrait of someone is that it should say something about that person that we feel is true to that personality. A picture speaks 1,000 words. In simple terms, taking photographs of people is termed as people photography. A good portrait sums up the character of the person, or at least an aspect of their character. For example, you don't know the girl or a boy in the picture, but looking at her or his photo, you have made some judgments about that subject and you have made some decisions about their character. Since people are always evolving, they are interesting and real. Photographing people has always fascinated millions. Everybody knows about basic emotions and a mood. Yet, capturing them in images is every human's day-to-day fantasy. We take pictures for various occasions, festivals, parties, and informal get-together functions. We do it to capture memories. People photography has been the most sought-after genre of photography and seems to remain a favorite of generations forever. A person's mood comprises the following elements to be captured by the camera: the pose, viewpoint, direction, quality of lighting, choice of lens, choice of background, cropping of a picture. While we look at a person in the photograph, we feel certain emotions which acknowledge his or her mood in that particular photograph. In other words, a good portrait is a picture that says something about the person, gives the viewer an insight into the character of the person photographed. Portraits are extremely attractive and depict real human emotion. It is by far the most important thing. Capturing the right moment is crucial, and with that in mind, it is important to take as many shots as you can. Each one will be slightly different from the other. As you take pictures, you will think up new ideas, as it is a constantly evolving process. Sometimes it takes about 50 shots to get the perfect one. The others are nice, most of them, but it's only the perfect one which stand out as being the best. Digital cameras have made the cost of taking number of pictures to almost nil. So much so that hundreds of pictures can be taken in one go without bothering about the cost of developing them. A data card can take thousands of photographs, which can later be transferred to a computer or a hard disk in a minute. The various types of portrait photography are candid, posed, formal, couple, environmental, sporting, children, group. When we speak of portrait photography in general terms, there is a tendency to overlook the subcategories from the strictly formal to the candid street shot. Let us look at the more common types of portrait photography. Here the subject is unaware. Candid basically refers to taking the picture at the spur of the moment. It makes a shot more authentic and genuine. Here the subject is aware of the fact that he or she is being photographed and is aware of the presence of the photographer and your camera. In a posed photograph, the photographer communicates with the subject by words or body language, what kind of body position or expression. In a posed picture, the photographer gets the subject to pose in front of the camera depending on the focus or what is required. A formal portrait is normally planned out. Communication between the photographer and subject regarding clothing, location, style and mood has been discussed. The photographer may have approached the subject or the client may have commissioned the photographer. These kinds of agreements are done with various events or corporations. For example, business portrait, a birthday or a glamour portrait. These are genres of commercial photography done on contractual basis. As the name states, this type of photography involves a pair. In this genre of photography, the challenge for the photographer is to interpret the relationship between the two people. For example, it could be the physical attachment of the mother and baby, the attraction between an engaged couple, and the camaraderie between two stage performers. The lens should be approximately the same level as the subject's eyes in order to capture emotions. In order to create a feel of relationships between some people, this type of photography is popularly used. A small group would be 3 to 7 people. The photographer's task is to portray the common bond existing between members of the group, like showing the bonding of family members, the solidarity and strength of members of the board, or the uniforms in a sporting team. Large group photography is done to capture a holistic or wholesome environment, people or place. A large group could be anywhere from 10 to several hundred. Typically, these days a wedding party will request a group shot of all the guests. The photographer is challenged more with human and technical logistics than aesthetic considerations. A high viewpoint is an advantage. An assistant with a friendly and persuasive manner is also helpful. The various types of groups comprise of gatherings like school groups, sporting teams, and wedding groups. A highly cherished and extremely talked about genre, environmental portraits show the subjects in their own territory. The subject's environment tells us as much or more about the subject than the facial features and pose. For example, the gardener in their garden, the woodcarver in their shed with all the lathes and tools, or the person in their favorite room, office, or den with the trappings that tell part of the story. Sports portraits are well acknowledged. People love it as they are attracted by the sports and the personalities involved. A sporting portrait is different from an action sports shot. The sporting portrait shows the subject with their uniform and equipment in their sporting environment. It can be taken before or after an event or at a separate time altogether. The important factor is to let the equipment and location tell part of the story. For example, a soccer player with a ball in front of the goal post, a swimmer with goggles, bathers sunbathing on a beach, or a cyclist resting on his bicycle with winding road behind. Portraits of children are very popular with parents, particularly when the child is young and more so with firstborn child. The portraits normally fit into the categories of posed or candid aware. People, especially children, get bored very quickly. If you start fiddling with your camera telling them to hold on a minute, you will never get good pictures. The most important part of the picture is the expression on the face. When the photographer sees the right expression, he must instantly capture it. Everything else, the lighting, the background, the composition must be ready. Facial expression, at least the good ones, are fleeting. If you ask someone to smile and you leave them holding that smile for even a second, it will look very false. When taking pictures of children, it is good to use a long lens and blend it into the background. After a while, they forget that you are there, then you start to get much more natural expressions. One needs a lot of patience to work in this way. You must not try and direct them to do something, as you may end up breaking their mood. It is best to just keep watching patiently to capture the right moment. When portrait photographs are composed and captured in a studio, the professional photographer has control over the lighting of the composition of the subject and can adjust the direction and intensity. There are many ways to light a subject's face, but there are several common lighting plans which are easy enough to describe. One of the most basic lighting plans is called three-point lighting. This plan uses 3 and sometimes 4 lights to fully model the subject's features. It brings out details and the 3-dimensionality of the subject. The various lights used in this light plan are as follows. Also called a main light, the key light is usually placed to one side of the subject's face between 30 and 60 degrees off center and a bit higher than the eye level. The key light is the brightest light in the lighting plan. Placed opposite the key light, the fill light fills in or softens the shadows on the opposite side of the face. The brightness of the fill light is usually between 1/3 and 1/4, that of the key light. This is expressed as a ratio as in 3:1 or 4:1. When the ratio is 3:1, the purpose of these two lights is to mimic the natural light created by placing a subject in a room near a window. The daylight falling on the subject through the window is the key light, and the fill light is reflected light coming from the walls of the room. This type of lighting can be found in the works of hundreds of classical painters and early photographers and is often called Rembrandt lighting. Also called a rim light or hair light, the rim light, which is the third main light in the three-point lighting plan, is placed behind the subject, out of the picture frame, and often rather higher than the key light or fill light. The point of the rim light is to provide separation from the background by highlighting the subject's shoulders and hair. The rim light should be just bright enough to provide separation from the background, but not as bright as the key light. Sometimes the rim light is set just off to the side on the fill light side. This can add edge details to the shadowed side of your model's face. This can add the effect of having a kicker light using only the three basic lights of three-point lighting. Butterfly lighting uses only two lights. The key light is placed directly in front of the subject, often above the camera or slightly to one side, and a bit higher than is common for a three-point lighting plan. The second light is a rim light. Often a reflector is placed below the subject's face to provide fill light and soften shadows. This lighting can be recognized by the strong light falling on the forehead, the bridge of the nose and the upper cheeks, and by the distinct shadow below the nose, which often looks rather like a butterfly and thus provides the same name for this lighting plan. It is also known as paramount lighting. It can be achieved using one light and a reflector or two lights and is popular because it is capable of producing images which appear both natural and compelling with a minimum of equipment. Rembrandt lighting is characterized by an illuminated triangle under the eye of the subject on the less illuminated side of the face. It is named for the Dutch painter Rembrandt, who often used this type of lighting. The fourth light in three-point lighting, a kicker, is a small light, often made directional or limited in coverage through the use of snoot, umbrella or softbox that adds a bright edge light on the fill light side of the subject's face, usually just enough to establish the jawline or edge of an ear. The kicker should thus be a bit brighter than the fill light, but not so bright that it overfills the off side of the face. The placement and brightness of a kicker is a matter of taste and technique. Many photographers shooting portraits choose not to use a kicker and settle for the three main lights of the standard plans. It may thus also be considered an accessory light. These lights can be added to basic lighting plans to provide additional highlights or add background definition. It is not so much a part of the portrait lighting plan, but rather designed to provide illumination for the background behind the subject. Background lights can pick out details in the background, provide a halo effect by illuminating a portion of a backdrop behind the subject's head, or turn the background pure white by filling it with light. Most lights used in modern photography are a flash of some sort. The lighting for portraiture is typically diffused by bouncing it from the inside of an umbrella or by using a softbox. A softbox is a fabric box encasing a photostrobe head, one side of which is made of translucent fabric. This provides a softer lighting for portrait work and is often considered more appealing than the harsh light often cast by open strobes. Hair and background lights are usually not diffused. It is more important to control light spillage to other areas of the subject. Snoots, barn doors, and flags or gobos help focus the lights exactly where the photographer wants them. Background lights are sometimes used with color gels placed in front of the light to create colored backgrounds. Lenses used in portrait photography are classically fast, medium telephoto lenses, though any lens may be used depending on artistic purposes. One can find various portrait lenses for SLR lenses in this style. Other manufacturers feature similar ranges. Classic focal length is in the range 80 to 135 mm on 35 film formats and about 150 to 400 mm on large format, which historically is first in photography. Such a field of view provides a flattering perspective distortion when the subject is framed to include their head and shoulders. Wider angle lenses, shorter focal length, require that the portrait be taken from closer distance to ensure an equivalent field size, and the resulting perspective distortion yields a relatively larger nose and smaller ears, which is considered unflattering and important. Wide-angle lenses or even fisheye lenses may be used for artistic effect, especially to produce a grotesque image. Conversely, longer focal lengths yield greater flattening because they are used from further away. This makes communication difficult and reduces rapport. They may be used particularly in fashion photography, but longer lengths require a loudspeaker or walkie-talkie to communicate with the model or assistants. In this range, the difference in perspective distortion between 85 mm and 135 mm is rather subtle. Speed-wise, fast lenses, wide aperture are preferred as these allow shallow depth of field blurring the background, which helps isolate the subject from the background and focus attention on them. This is particularly useful in the field where one does not have a backdrop behind the subject and the background may be distracting. However, extremely wide apertures are less frequently used because they have a very shallow depth of field and thus the subject's face will not be completely in focus. Thus, f/1.8 or f/2 is usually the maximum aperture used. f/1/2 or f/1.4 may be used, but the resulting defocus may be considered a special effect. The eyes will be sharp, but the ears and nose will be soft. Conversely, in environmental portraits where the subject is shown in their environment rather than isolated from it, background blur is less desirable and may be undesirable, and wider angle lenses may be used to show more context. Most often, a prime lens will be used both because the zoom is not necessary for post shots and primes are lighter, cheaper, faster and higher quality, and because zoom lenses can introduce highly unflattering geometric distortion, barrel distortion or pincushion distortion. However, zoom lenses may be used particularly in candid shots or to encourage creative framing. Portrait lenses are often relatively inexpensive because they can be built simply and are close to the normal range. The cheapest portrait lenses are normal lenses, 50 mm, used on a cropped sensor. For example, the Canon EF 50 mm f/1.8 2 is the least expensive Canon lens, but when used on a 1.6 cropped sensor yields an 80 mm equivalent focal length, which is at the wide end of portrait lenses. People photography has many modes. Exemplifying a plethora of emotions, people photography is done dramatically, technically, and intellectually. An everlasting thirst to derive clearer human feeling, people photography is here to stay. That is all that we have for you for today. Till the next time, it's a goodbye.